You sit here before me, and though your faces change, though the centuries pass, the essence of your struggle has always been the same. You are drawn into the circle of pain and forgiveness, and it perplexes you. Why, you ask, do you forgive those who wound you most deeply? Why do you open your heart again to the one who has pierced it with the sharpest of blades? You think perhaps it is weakness, perhaps naivety, perhaps a lack of boundaries, but I tell you it is neither weakness nor foolishness. It is the deep, unconscious ritual of the soul, a dance between shadow and light that repeats itself until its meaning is seen. Forgiveness is not always the shining virtue you imagine it to be. It can be, and at times it must be, but often forgiveness springs not from love alone, but from compulsion, from archetypal currents moving beneath your awareness. The empath, that sensitive vessel attuned to the feelings of others, finds themselves ensnared by a peculiar destiny. They forgive the unforgivable, they love the unlovable, and they return again and again to the very hand that strikes them. This is not a rational act, it is a mystery of the psyche. And like all mysteries, it must be unveiled slowly. In dreams, I have seen this pattern appear again and again. A dreamer speaks of a serpent biting their hand, yet they cradle the serpent close, unwilling to cast it away. Another dreams of a house perpetually flooded by water, yet they stay within, mopping endlessly, refusing to abandon the dwelling. These are images of the empath psyche, drawn to repair, to restore, to bring harmony, even where there is destruction. You must understand that this is not merely kindness, it is an unconscious repetition of the earliest wounds, the primal betrayals written into the soul long before you could name them. You forgive because in forgiving, you secretly hope to heal what was never healed in you. You believe that if you can redeem the betrayer, perhaps you will redeem yourself. The shadow, that dark twin who walks with you always, hides behind this forgiveness. It whispers, if you can bear the suffering, if you can embrace the cruelty and still love, then you will prove your worth. You will transcend the rejection of old, but in truth, it is a trap. The empath becomes a martyr, offering themselves on the altar of another's brokenness, mistaking sacrifice for transformation. I do not condemn this, for it arises from the noblest of intentions, the longing to bring light into darkness. But I must reveal to you that the psyche does not grow by endless forgiveness alone. The psyche grows by recognition, by confrontation, by the courage to see what is and not only what you wish it to be. Consider the archetype of the wounded healer. This figure, seen in Chiron the centaur, embodies the paradox. He heals others, but cannot heal himself. So too does the empath forgive others. Even when they cannot forgive their own wounds, the unconscious drives them to embrace pain because pain feels familiar, and what is familiar feels like home. Forgiveness becomes a repetition, compulsion, a way of returning to the scene of the injury in hopes of a different ending. But the ending does not change until consciousness enters, until you say, I see why I return. I see why I forgive. I see why I open the door to the one who bruises me. Without this seeing, forgiveness becomes bondage. Let me take you deeper, for it is not enough to remain at the surface. The empath is often born in households where emotional currents ran strong, where one learned early to sense every shift in mood, every subtle withdrawal of love, every eruption of anger. The child, unable to defend themselves, develops a heightened sensitivity, a capacity to absorb the emotional atmosphere like a sponge. This is survival. If the parent rages, the child must feel it before it comes, must adapt, must soothe, must forgive in advance just to remain safe. Thus, the archetype of the empath is formed in the crucible of childhood. Forgiveness becomes a survival strategy. Without it, the child would drown. With it, they hope to keep love alive. And so the adult empath continues the ritual, not knowing that they are still playing the child's role. They forgive the betrayer, because in their unconscious, the betrayer is the parent, the original source of life and death. To cast them out would feel like annihilation. To forgive is to remain alive. Do you see? The forgiveness is less about the offender and more about the archaic fear of abandonment and rejection. It is the child's desperate hope projected onto the adult's relationship. Now, this is where the mystical dimension emerges. The psyche is not content to leave these patterns unchallenged. The self, the totality within you, calls you again and again into the same relationships until you awaken. That is why the empath attracts those who wound. They are living mirrors of the inner wound. Each act of forgiveness is not meaningless. It is a stage in the alchemical process. You are attempting to transmute lead into gold, shadow into light, but the alchemy remains incomplete until you forgive not only the other, but yourself, until you reclaim the energy you have poured outward and recognize that your own shadow longs for integration. In myth, we see Persephone descending into the underworld, abducted, yet through her descent, she becomes queen of both worlds. So too must the empath descend into the underworld of their own motives, to see that forgiveness is not always divine. It can be compulsion, it can be fear, it can be the inability to face one's own rage. Yes, rage. For the empath, beneath the surface, carries a reservoir of unexpressed anger. They are afraid to feel it, lest it destroy the fragile love they cling to, so they forgive instead, burying anger in the unconscious. But what is buried does not die, it waits. It emerges in dreams, in bodily symptoms, in sudden, inexplicable bitterness. Only when the empath turns toward this anger, honors it as part of the self, can forgiveness transform from compulsion into freedom. Imagine this. You stand before the one who has hurt you. You feel the pull to forgive instantly, to release them, to welcome them again. But this time, you pause, you listen inward, you hear the shadow's voice, the neglected child's cry. You allow yourself to feel the anger, the sorrow, the betrayal. You do not suppress it in the name of virtue. You honor it, and then, if you forgive, it is not from compulsion, but from strength. It is not to preserve a broken bond, but to affirm your wholeness, that forgiveness liberates rather than enslaves. The mystical truth is that forgiveness without boundaries is self-betrayal. The self calls you not to endless sacrifice, but to balance. You are not only light, you are also shadow. You are not only empathy, you are also instinct. To forgive rightly, you must stand in both. You must see the archetypal drama being played, the parent and the child, the betrayer and the redeemer, the wound and the healer. You must know that every time you forgive the one who hurts you most, you are being invited to look deeper, to awaken to the original wound that set this cycle in motion. In the end, the question is not whether to forgive, but whether you will awaken. Will you continue to forgive unconsciously, repeating the child's ritual, or will you enter the mystery with open eyes, seeing that every act of forgiveness is also an act of remembering the lost child within, the shadow abandoned, the rage suppressed, the wholeness yet to be embraced? For when you forgive from that place, you are no longer chained to the betrayer. You are free. And in your freedom, even your forgiveness becomes divine. When I speak of forgiveness, I am not speaking of the polished ideal that churches and moralists present to you. I am speaking of the raw, trembling act that arises from the depth of the unconscious. Often without your consent. To understand why empaths forgive those who wound them most, we must enter into the subterranean caverns of the psyche, where love and cruelty are not yet separated, where the archetypes of the parent, the lover, the enemy, and the redeemer intertwine in a single figure. The empath does not merely forgive an individual, they are unconsciously reenacting the myth of the soul's descent, hoping to transform what has always been untransformed. Forgiveness for the empath is a thread woven into the fabric of their being. It emerges not from reason, but from the longing to dissolve conflict, to return to unity, to bridge what is broken. Yet this longing is perilous, for it blinds the empath to the truth that some bonds are meant not to be restored, but to be relinquished. The wound becomes sacred to them. It defines their very identity. To let it go feels like losing themselves. And so they forgive again and again, because forgiveness preserves the illusion of continuity, the hope that love will survive even the cruelest betrayal. I have observed in patients and in my own dreams that the figures who wound us most often carry the face of the inner God. A man dreams of a woman who seduces him only to vanish, leaving him bereft. Another dreams of a father who strikes him, yet immediately embraces him afterward. These figures are ambivalent. They wound and they love. They destroy and they heal. The psyche experiences this as an archetypal tension, the union of opposites, and the empath is drawn into it as though it were the heartbeat of existence itself. They forgive not only because they must, but because in forgiving they feel they are touching the mystery of life, that vast paradox in which love and cruelty are never fully disentangled. But let me be clear, this mystery is not meant to enslave you, it is meant to awaken you. The empaths must come to see that their forgiveness is both gift and curse. As gift, it carries the power to break cycles of vengeance, to open doors where none seemed possible. As curse, It chains them to those who would feed on their light, leaving them drained and disoriented. The unconscious does not distinguish between gift and curse. It presents both, and it is for consciousness to discern. Without discernment, the empath mistakes their chains for wings. Let us consider the alchemical image of the nigredo, the blackening. In the first stage of transformation, all is dissolved, all is dismembered, all is reduced to chaos. The empath's repeated forgiveness is akin to this stage. They endure the chaos of betrayal. They dissolve their boundaries. They surrender again and again. But if they remain here, they never ascend. Forgiveness without transformation keeps them in eternal nigredo. To move onward, they must enter albedo, the whitening where discernment emerges, where they see that to forgive is not always to remain. Sometimes forgiveness means departure. Sometimes it means acknowledging the shadow in the other without offering oneself as its victim. Do not misunderstand me. I do not counsel bitterness. Bitterness is the poison that hardens the heart and isolates the soul. But neither do I counsel blind forgiveness. True forgiveness is born only when the shadow has been confronted, when the anger and the grief have been acknowledged. The empath must learn that to say no is also an act of love. To set a boundary is to honor the self. Without this, forgiveness is but another mask worn by fear. Think of the dream where the dreamer stands in front of a locked door, fumbling with keys that never fit. Again and again they try, but the door remains closed. This is the empath's plight. They forgive endlessly, but the door to transformation does not open because they are trying to force the wrong key. The key is not more forgiveness, but recognition of why they forgive. Only when they realize that their forgiveness is often an attempt to rewrite their own past can they choose differently. Then, and only then, does the door open, and behind it lies not the betrayer transformed, but the self reborn. The mystical element cannot be ignored, for in every act of forgiveness, conscious or unconscious, the soul is reaching towards the archetype of the Christ, the one who forgives all, yet the danger lies in imitation without integration. The archetype of the Christ is wholeness, incarnate. It can embrace betrayal without destruction, because it contains both shadow and light. The empath, however, is still fragmented, is still wounded. To attempt to embody unconditional forgiveness without having integrated one's own shadow is to carry a burden too great. It is to crucify oneself in the hope of saving another, and this, though noble in image, leads only to depletion. I ask you now, what if the act of forgiveness you so freely offer to others is first required for yourself? What if the one you must forgive most deeply is not the betrayer outside you, but the neglected child within you, that child who absorbed too much, who forgave too quickly, who believed that love must be earned by enduring pain? What if your compulsive forgiveness of others is merely the echo of your refusal to forgive yourself for being wounded, for being human, for being vulnerable? To forgive yourself is to end the cycle. To forgive yourself is to reclaim the energy that has been scattered through endless acts of external forgiveness. The unconscious will continue to present the same patterns until you awaken. The betrayer will appear in many forms: a lover, a friend, a parent, even a stranger. Each time you will feel the pull to forgive, to heal, to redeem, but each time you also have the choice to pause, to see, to recognize the archetype at work. And in that recognition, you begin to transcend it. Then forgiveness becomes no longer compulsion, but choice. It becomes a conscious act, aligned with the self rather than driven by fear. Let me offer you an image. The empath as a tree rooted by a river. The river flows endlessly, carrying away debris, cleansing, forgiving. But the tree must also stand firm, or it will be uprooted and swept away. To forgive without roots is to be lost in the flood. To forgive with roots is to remain nourished by the waters, yet not destroyed by them. The roots are your boundaries, your shadow, your discernment. With them, forgiveness nourishes. Without them, forgiveness consumes. This is why I tell you, to forgive rightly, you must first embrace your own shadow. You must acknowledge the anger you have buried, the grief you have silenced, the truth you have denied. You must confront the fear that if you stop forgiving, you will lose love forever. Only then can your forgiveness be whole. Only then can it be an expression of strength rather than weakness, of wholeness rather than compulsion. And so, when you find yourself again before the one who wounds you, ask not first, can I forgive them? Ask instead, can I face the part of myself that longs to forgive them? Can I see what wound within me their presence awakens? Can I forgive myself for being vulnerable, for needing love, for clinging to hope? For it is in that self-forgiveness that the cycle ends. Then, when you extend forgiveness outward, it is pure, unburdened, and free. You must understand that the psyche is not satisfied with the shallow gesture of words spoken hastily, I forgive you, uttered before the wound has even been examined. The soul requires more than politeness, more than the outward performance of virtue. The unconscious insists upon truth. If you bypass the truth of your wound, if you skip over the rage and sorrow that surge within, your forgiveness will be brittle. It will collapse under the weight of another betrayal, and you will find yourself again in the same cycle, forgiving before you have even acknowledged what was done to you. This is not forgiveness. It is repression disguised as light. The empath feels compelled to forgive quickly because they are terrified of separation. They know what it is to feel abandoned, and they will do anything to avoid that abyss. Yet it is precisely in the abyss that transformation lies. When you resist the separation, when you cling to the offender with your forgiveness, you deny yourself the descent into the underworld where your soul waits. The abyss is not the end of you. It is the place where you meet your own depths. To forgive rightly, you must first be willing to lose the other, to walk into the darkness alone, to face the terror of emptiness. Only there does the self reveal itself, rising like a hidden sun. There is a story in many cultures of the hero who must enter the cave where the monster dwells. The empath avoids this cave by forgiving too quickly. They say, the monster is not real. It is only misunderstood. They befriend it. They excuse it. They bind themselves to it. But the monster is real. It is the shadow, both theirs and the others. To forgive without entering the cave is to remain unconscious. To forgive after having faced the monster, after having wrestled with rage and grief, this is transformation. This is the forgiveness that liberates rather than enslaves. I have seen this in my work with patients. A woman who always forgave her cruel husband realized in analysis that she was not forgiving him at all, she was forgiving her father, whom she had never been able to confront. Another man who forgave a friend who betrayed him financially discovered that he was replaying the original betrayal by his mother, who withheld affection, unless he pleased her. Each act of forgiveness in the present was a repetition of a deeper story until they turned inward, until they faced the original wound. Their forgiveness was hollow. But when they entered the cave, forgiveness became real. And they no longer felt compelled to remain in destructive relationships. The empath carries within them the archetype of the Redeemer. They long to redeem not only others, but life itself. They believe, often unconsciously, that if they forgive enough, love will finally triumph. This longing is not evil. It is the divine spark within them, but without consciousness, it becomes a crucifixion. They give their body and soul to those who devour it, believing this sacrifice will change the world. But the world does not change through unconscious sacrifice. It changes through the integration of shadow, through wholeness, through the union of opposites. Forgiveness alone is not wholeness. Forgiveness without confrontation is avoidance. Forgiveness without self-respect is self-abandonment. There is a secret that few dare to admit. Sometimes the most sacred act is not forgiveness, but refusal. Sometimes the soul demands that you say no, that you close the door, that you walk away. In that refusal lies the seed of true forgiveness. For only then do you stop betraying yourself. Only then do you honor the self, which requires balance, not endless surrender. The empath must learn this paradox. To forgive authentically, you must be willing not to forgive. Only then is your yes real, because it is chosen, not compelled. I invite you to imagine a dream. You stand in a vast cathedral, sunlight streaming through stained glass. A figure approaches someone who has wounded you deeply. They kneel and ask forgiveness. You feel the old pull, the familiar compulsion to say yes, but this time you hear another sound, the beating of your own heart, the voice of your shadow. It says, "Not yet. First, see me." You turn inward and see your anger, your sorrow, your fear. You embrace them. Only then do you turn back to the figure. And now, whether you forgive or not, you are free. For you, forgiveness is no longer a bargain struck in fear. It is the expression of your wholeness. The empath often fears their own darkness more than anything else. They believe that to feel anger is to become like the one who hurt them. So they suppress it, smother it, deny it. But the shadow does not vanish. It grows in silence. True forgiveness demands that you integrate this shadow, that you admit, I too am capable of rage. I too am capable of betrayal. I too am not purely light, only then can you stand as a whole being before the one who wronged you. Only then can your forgiveness carry the weight of truth. This is why I tell you, forgiveness is not the end of the journey, but the fruit of it. It is not the beginning, but the culmination. You must travel through the valley of your own shadow, through the labyrinths of your own wounds, before forgiveness can flower. And when it does, it is no longer the compulsive act of the empath seeking safety. It is the conscious act of the self-affirming wholeness. Such forgiveness does not bind you to the betrayer. It releases you from them. It is not the forgiveness that keeps you in the cycle, but the forgiveness that ends it. Do you see? Then, why empaths forgive those who hurt them most? It is because the wound and the longing for wholeness are intertwined. It is because their soul remembers the original injury and seeks its healing in every relationship. It is because they are unconsciously reenacting the ancient myths of betrayal and redemption, and it is because they have not yet fully embraced their shadow. But once they do, forgiveness changes. It becomes not a compulsion, but a choice, not a survival strategy, but an expression of freedom. So I urge you, do not condemn yourself for forgiving. Do not call yourself weak or naive. See instead the archetypal drama at play within you. Recognize the child who learned to forgive in order to survive, the healer who forgives to redeem, the redeemer who forgives to bring light, and then, with compassion, with courage, ask yourself, am I forgiving because I must, or because I choose? Am I forgiving to preserve a bond or to honor my wholeness? Am I forgiving from fear or from freedom? For the answers to these questions reveal whether your forgiveness is bondage or liberation. The truth is that forgiveness is not a single act, not a clean cut from shadow into light, but a process as slow and sacred as the opening of a flower. You cannot rush it, though empaths so often do. They rush because they fear what lies in the waiting, the silence, the separation, the loneliness. They confuse delay with cruelty, but it is not cruelty to pause. It is wisdom. It is the psyche insisting that the wound must be tended before the balm is applied. When forgiveness comes too soon, it seals the wound without cleansing it. And infection spreads beneath the surface. When forgiveness arises from patience, it heals from the inside out. Leaving no hidden poison, you have been taught that to forgive is always to reconcile, but this is not so. Forgiveness can be the final blessing spoken as you walk away. Forgiveness can be the letting go of your need for revenge, even as you protect yourself from further harm. Forgiveness can be silent, inward, known only to your soul. It is not always a handshake, not always an embrace. Sometimes it is simply the unclenching of your own fist, the release of your own chain. And this is perhaps the most radical truth for the empath to learn. You may forgive without returning. You may forgive without remaining bound. You may forgive without abandoning yourself. Why then do empaths so often forgive the very ones who wound them most? Because the betrayer is not merely an individual, they are an image, a projection, a figure woven from threads of your unconscious. They carry the face of your lost parent, the echo of your first rejection, the voice of your unhealed shadow. You believe You are forgiving them, but in truth, you are forgiving your own story. Over and over again, you return to them because you hope that if they change, if they repent, if they finally love you as you love them, then your past will be rewritten. But the past is not rewritten in another's arms. It is rewritten within your own heart. When you embrace the child within who was never seen, never heard, never held, that is where the cycle ends. The shadow always lingers around forgiveness. If you deny it, you will forgive compulsively, endlessly, without discernment. If you embrace it, forgiveness becomes rare, holy, weighty. You begin to see who is worthy of your return and who is not. You begin to see that forgiveness is not a virtue to be hoarded, but an alchemical act to be offered only when it aligns with the self. To forgive rightly is to know the difference between the one who wounded out of ignorance and the one who wounds because it is their nature. To forgive rightly is to know when reconciliation is possible and when separation is sacred. To forgive rightly is to see yourself as deserving of love that does not demand endless sacrifice. The mystical truth is this: forgiveness is not about the other at all. It is about you. It is about the integration of your own opposites, the union of your own light and shadow. When you forgive unconsciously, you remain a fragment, scattering your energy outward. When you forgive consciously, you gather yourself, you become whole. Then forgiveness is no longer a transaction, no longer a desperate plea for peace. It is the overflow of a soul that has made peace with itself. And such forgiveness has power. It can heal without words. It can bless without touch. It can alter the fabric of a life, but it cannot be compelled. It must arise from wholeness, or it is not forgiveness at all. I tell you now, there will come a day when you no longer forgive out of fear, but out of freedom. There will come a day when you no longer rush to absolve those who wound you, but wait, discern, and choose with clarity. There will come a day when you look into the eyes of the one who hurt you and feel no compulsion, no chain, no bargaining with the past, only the calm knowledge that you are free. On that day, forgiveness, if it comes, will be pure, and if it does not, you will still be whole. For forgiveness is not the measure of your worth. Wholeness is. So let us descend one final time into the imagery of the dream. You stand again at the threshold of a great hall. Inside are gathered all those who have wounded you. They turn to you, one by one, and ask forgiveness. You feel the old pull, the familiar ache. But this time, you do not rush forward. You walk slowly, carrying the lamp of consciousness. You shine it upon each face. Some you forgive, blessing them as they fade into the light. Others you do not, turning instead to walk away, blessing yourself with the strength to refuse. And as you move through the hall, you realize that the figures are dissolving, melting into smoke, until at the end only one remains, the child you once were. You kneel before that child, and at last you whisper, "I forgive you." And in that moment, the whole vanishes, the figures vanish, and you stand alone, radiant, whole, unbound. This is why empaths forgive those who wound them most, because they are searching for that child, because they are searching for themselves, because forgiveness, when unconscious, is a compulsion that binds, but when conscious, is a key that frees. You must decide which it will be. Will you continue to forgive without seeing, without discerning, without integrating, or will you pause, confront your shadow, embrace your anger, and forgive from wholeness? The choice is yours. And in that choice lies your liberation. So I leave you with this. Do not fear the shadow that rises when you hesitate to forgive. Do not silence the anger that burns when you remember the wound. Do not rush to reconcile when your soul is still bleeding, for it is in the shadow that you find your strength. It is in the anger that you find your truth. It is in the waiting that you find your wholeness. And when wholeness comes, forgiveness will either blossom naturally or fall away as unnecessary. In either case, you will be free, and freedom, not forgiveness, is the true goal of the soul.